mean, we all know the Terminator, and then we also see all these people promising us how great AI is going to be. And I love this meme right now where like people talk about, well, I wanted AI to do the vacuuming and wash my dishes so I could be the one creating art. But now we have AI that's creating our art instead of doing the stuff like that we don't want to do. And then you kind of like have that question as a human. What's the point of this tool if it's like making my life more miserable?
This is the future.
Hello and welcome to the Alternate Futures podcast, where we chat with indie sci-fi creators about their work, the world, and anything in between, or beyond. Today I'm here with Anthony Melchiorri. Tony grew up in a central Illinois town called Normal. Since then, he's done his best to venture beyond the normal. He's eaten tarantulas in Cambodia, hiked an erupting volcano in Guatemala, explored abandoned KGB prisons in Estonia, and trekked Ugandan jungles to photograph mountain gorillas. Many of Tony's books are inspired by a mixture of his travels and his background as a research scientist. While he earned a BA in English at the University of Iowa, he also completed a BSc in biomedical engineering. His career led him to the University of Maryland. There he graduated with a PhD in bioengineering before running a research laboratory that specializes in 3D printing artificial organs. He's developed materials to 3D print blood vessels and cartilage, invented devices to extract bone samples from patients, and created cellular therapies to help heal wounds. Tony currently calls Colorado home with his wife and an untamable growing collection of books. Hi, Tony. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you very much. Very excited to be here.
That's a pretty amazing CV you've got there. It's I'm quite jealous, to be honest.
Try to pack in a lot, you know.
Yeah. Got to ask. First thing is, what did tarantula taste like? And you can't say chicken.
It definitely did not taste like chicken. Okay. And it depends on which part of the tarantula you're eating. The legs, I got them fried, so it was kind of cheating. It's like fried in a lot of dough. So, you know, the legs are like, what do I want to say? Like closer to French fries. And the body was a little squishy. So maybe a little bit like a weird grassy crab, if that makes sense.
Okay. I'm not sure I can picture that, but I'm not really sure I want to either.
Yeah, you know, it's a once in a lifetime thing and you're good. Or maybe right. Zero and you're also good.
So you're like, when in Cambodia, do as Cambodians do.
Right. You know,
is it a delicacy there, or is it just sort of standard fare?
It's I mean, it's some people eat it and stuff, but it's not like super common. But it was at this specialty cafe, and I think they're still running, and their whole point is like being kind of sustainable and like, hey, we can use bugs as a different type of meat. Doesn't taste like normal types of meat, but they're very creative with a lot of the stuff they had.
Right, because that is something we're hearing over in the West. Oh, you got to get used to eating crickets and stuff. Do you think that's going to catch on based on your experience then?
Probably not.
Right.
No, I mean it's a great idea because, you know, the bugs take like no energy, very easy to produce, right? Replicate like crazy, lots of high protein. So as far as like a health thing, it's not a bad deal. Right. But the taste leaves something to be desired. I mean, I will say they had these silkworms that they marinated that it sounds kind of crazy, but those were my favorite. So I actually liked those. Like if you gave me that, I'd do that again. But they were also with some noodles and veggies and stuff. There was water bugs, which are basically, you know, just like some swimming cockroaches. Would not touch those again. We did scorpions. Those were like mini lobsters. They could be okay, but you know, like it definitely runs the gamut.
All right, maybe you can write a book on how to choose which insects to eat when when the new world order starts.
Yeah, there we go. We'll have recipes and everything ready to go.
Yeah, exactly. So from tarantula tasting to photographing gorillas, what was that like? Trekking through Uganda.
That was pretty cool. I mean, you know, it's a very, you know, tourist tailored experience, so it's not like I'm a super crazy adventure or anything, right? But going to the mountains and like getting a chance to actually see these animals up close, which are super peaceful. They smell really bad. You don't picture that. Nobody tells you about that, but you go there and you're like, oh, there's a lot going on here. But it was really cool. We saw like a family of ranging from like, I think this youngest was about 6 months old on up to a couple adult males that had, neither one of them had decided to run the family. So there wasn't really a silverback. So they're kind of a very lazy family of gorillas where nobody really wanted to be dominant. But it was amazing seeing those animals up close and getting a chance to try to take a few pictures of them. And yeah, that was an experience. I think it was like, 4 hours to kind of hike to find these gorillas, another 5 hours to get out. And you have these rangers that kind of scout out where the gorillas are that day to go find them in this preserve. So really all the hard work is kind of taken out of it for you. And you just have to be able to hike to go see them. And then you get that, like, this amazing hour with these animals. No cages, no wild animal tamers or anything. This is just you and some wild animals that sitting in the middle of the jungle.
Western tourist jungle experience. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how was the weather in Uganda compared to Colorado then?
A little bit more humid,
Okay.
but yeah, I guess actually not crazy different because we're both pretty moderate temperatures and stuff. So it'd get hot there, but yeah, not terrible. I liked it. I mean, I heard like in the human evolution, a lot of that took place kind of in that environment. So it's like, oh, this is a good temperature for humans to prosper. So it's pretty comfortable, a little hot, but not too bad.
I'm telling you, you will not be able to sell that idea to the British. Many of them don't like, I mean, they will venture for a vacation, to warmer places, but many of them will typically say, oh, they really prefer the British weather, temperature wise and stuff like that. So yeah, it'll be hard. It'll be a hard sell up here, I think, to convince them that of that. Oh, and then you've been to Estonian KGB prisons. Now, the one thing that comes to my mind there is recently over here, because they've filled up our prison systems with people saying bad things on Facebook. So they're actually talking about shipping our prisoners over to, I believe it was Estonia as well. So we might be filling up those empty KGB prisons pretty soon, I think.
Well, that's wild.
Yeah, that's a bit frightening. So have you got like a bucket list that you want to do, like something on every continent? Is that sort of your
kind of, yeah. I mean, I had a list for a while that I put together different places I wanted to see it, and different natural things, historical things, that kind of thing. Still trying to check some of those things off. Actually, when I went full time into writing, it was the first time I could move my day job anywhere. And so my wife and I we took about a year and a half off from Colorado, packed up all our stuff, left it in storage, and then kind of bopped around while I continued to write. And we'd live in different places where we're guessing like, oh, we'll probably never be able to make it here otherwise. So let's go hang out here for a little bit. And that's how we fit in some of our adventures. So working, I didn't have to pay rent at a place at home. So that helped when I'm only, staying at these places around the world.
Right.
So yeah, that was kind of our big goal, was to knock off a lot of these bucket list items, check that out before we come back to Colorado and settle down.
So were you able to write on those trips then as well, or are you just sort of focused on the traveling?
Yeah, so what we like, our main goal was I needed to write, so I couldn't just take that long off. So we'd go somewhere, and instead of just being somewhere for, with our American holidays, it's usually like, oh, you can take a week off. I'm lucky now that I can kind of schedule my own time, but usually it'd be like when she and I were both working, we could only take a week off, go explore somewhere, and you feel a little bit like, I want to relax, but I'm also pressured to see this place. Instead, for this, we kind of tried to find a place where we'd settle roots for like about a month or something. So that way we could get into a routine where I could actually work during the day. And then we go out and explore, or, work at night and explore during the day, that kind of thing. So that was a really nice balance, I think. So I was able to actually I think I still produced, I think it was like 7 books or something during that time. So it wasn't as fast as if I'm just at home, but it was still, making sure that I keeping things going.
That's a pretty good pace then. Yeah. So you kind of were able to use them as writing retreats then, to some degree as well, weren't you then? It sounds like.
Yeah, exactly. I think, and for me, it kind of helps jog my mind to kind of put myself into a different setting. I can really get I can find myself easily getting into a routine. But I find a lot of inspiration in kind of just exploring something new, even just around here in Colorado, going to a different town or going on a different hike, meeting some different people. And when you kind of blend all these new elements of different cultures, different foods, different architecture, all that kind of stuff, it's really awesome for sci-fi because it keeps those creative juices flowing. So I think in a lot of ways, it was actually really helpful for my productivity to get these new experiences, push you out of your comfort zone, slow down a little bit and kind of be present with like a completely new environment where you have to learn simple things like, how does public transit work here? How does the grocery store work here? How am I going to cook with these foods that I'm not used to cooking with? And all that kind of is like really nice. It's like, oh, it's kind of like, one of my latest sci-fi series was, this guy finds himself suddenly in space, right? In a new environment, learning how to function in alien civilization. What's that like? Well, we can kind of, extrapolate a little bit with some real world experiences. So I think that is really nice, not only just to use it as those times for writing retreat, but also fuel for that writing. So that was a big theme for me for that time.
No, it's excellent. Yeah. So just before we get into sort of your writing, I wanted to sort of touch on your biomedical engineering career, because initially in your bio, I was like, it sounded like you started a bachelor's in English and then went into biomedical engineering. I was like, that's a very strange path. But as I read it better. You did a double major. Was that what it was? Or
yeah, I did. When I was in college, it was kind of cool actually. So I knew I wanted to be an engineer. I felt like, okay, that's the sure way to make a career. Writing is like a dream, right? Like who knows what will happen with that. So I went to the University of Iowa because they have a pretty renowned writing program. And they have a good biomedical engineering program. So that was what kind of my decision back when I was in high school, trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. And then biomedical engineering there, like they had a lot of great research with a very good medical school right on campus across the river from where my engineering school was. So it was great to have those kind of collaborations. And a big reason I went there was because the engineering program encouraged engineers there to do something else. So like do something that's totally unrelated to your engineering. Go get a minor in business. Go do some political science stuff. But do whatever you want to kind of make yourself a well-rounded engineer. That was kind of their mantra when I went there. And for me, that was like, okay, how am I going to get involved with writing? I took a couple English classes. Like I'm going to do a minor in English, and then I realized I missed this way too much. I've got to do more. So I did the double major and I added that so I could actually do some of those writing classes and get involved in writing workshops and stuff while I was in undergrad there. So yeah, that's pretty much how that came about.
Oh, that's excellent. And so are you still doing the 3D organ printing, or was that something in the interim before you became a full-time writer?
Yeah, that was, let's see it. I stopped doing the science stuff really in 2021. So it's been a few years since I've just done writing full time. But I was working with some researchers, started up a lab at Rice University down in Houston, Texas, where we were 3D printing different tissues and organs and kind of like helping students with their projects. They'd come and say like, hey, I need a 3D print with this kind of material for this type of organ or this type of experiment. And that's what the lab was all about. So I started that lab up, ran that for 5 years. And I actually went part-time. My boss was really great. And I was able to go part-time there for a while, especially while the writing was picking up. And then eventually I just, had to let them know like, I gotta pursue this writing thing. So
Right.
So here we are.
Yeah. I got one more question that I'll be remiss if I don't ask you, coming from England. But on your LinkedIn bio, it says you're passionate about the interface between biology, healthcare, and innovation. And this is very timely for us in England because our NHS, National Health Service, is essentially falling apart. So I don't know how much you know about the NHS, but I was wondering if you were to try and revamp it, what would be like the first thing you might do?
Oh man, that's a really
big question, but
that's a tough question. Yeah, I mean, I think having worked in the medical device industry for a little bit, and I can kind of extrapolate from the U.S. version of this because I'm far more familiar. I'm familiar with the NHS, but if I said anything, I would look like I was a very misinformed individual trying to levy some uninformed opinions on it. So I think the biggest thing is I guess there's kind of these two issues I see with the healthcare system from like being in that side of it. And that's, the fact that health is like treated as a business, and for us, like, especially in the US, like, okay, you have to make these immediate decisions and find the best price for your medical care, or you're not told the price. And it's like, it's really not a fair way to go shopping for medical care when you have a broken leg or you have an emergency or you find out you have cancer. And so I think that the fact that, sometimes companies or even like for-profit health systems can take advantage of that isn't super great. I think the other thing that a lot of our medical care focuses on, and I've seen other countries that are the opposite of this, is preventative versus reactive. A great example of this is not healthcare, but this is my favorite example. Amsterdam is technically below sea level, right? Much of the Netherlands is civilized is below sea level, but they've worked to have this the canals, lock systems, all kinds of great water mitigation systems to prevent flooding. So they're very proactive, preventing natural disasters, because we all know flooding is super expensive if it happens. I lived in Houston, Texas. Opposite. We have a way less preventative manners. So whenever a hurricane comes in or there's flooding, it's a disaster and it's always way more expensive to fix, but nobody's willing to put the money into preventing it because they're like, oh, this is a huge bill to prevent this kind of flooding, even though they have the technology and there's engineering groups that have, here's what we suggest we do, but it's too expensive to foot at one time. So they choose to reactively deal with it every time it floods. And that to me is kind of like with healthcare, the best thing we can do is promote, and this is like personal as well as systemic to me, is promote that preventative healthcare. And that would reduce, I think my big thing was doing research with cardiovascular health. And cardiovascular health was the number one killer of adults for a very long time. It might still be. But a lot of it's preventative. So a lot of the effects of cardiovascular health can be improved with better diet, better food, and just doing checkups to check blood pressure, things like that you might not be able to know on your own until you go in to see the doctor. So that emphasis on kind of preventative care would save us tons of money, save us tons of time, and help people live longer. So I'm not, and that's personal choices, that's government stuff, that's healthcare companies, a whole bunch of factors that go into it. But I think that kind of like idea of preventing as much of those problems as we can would be super helpful. I don't know what that looks like in a practical solution, but philosophically, I like it.
Yeah, no, it does sound good. Do you think it would put us at odds with big pharma?
Yeah, I think it kind of depends. I always like this conspiracy theory. Having worked in pharmaceutical companies and medical companies, there's always this thing like they have the cure to cancer already. They just don't want to, like treat people because then they would lose their client basis. Cancer is super complicated, so that's not going away. Like one of our biggest problems is actually just identifying it. So that's a totally separate scientific tangent I'd love to talk about for way longer than we probably have.
Right.
But when it comes down to it, if you're the company that's hiding that secret, somebody else is going to scoop it, and they're going to be super wealthy. So pharmaceutical companies usually have the emphasis on, they really want to be ahead, be a leader in that, because they want to have the brand name drugs. So I think to some extent, if we can be preventative and these pharmaceutical companies can be like, oh, hey, we can help you be preventative, maybe they're good with that. Kind of like Ozempic really helping people out now with diabetes, for instance. And that to me is a little bit of like preventative or maintenance kind of stuff that I'm talking about to help prevent the worst problems, which is where a lot of money can be made. So it's always going to be competitive. And I think if it was just one big pharma company by themselves, maybe it would be more at odds with them. But there's a lot of pharmaceutical companies or a few big ones that are competing for their slice of the pie. So hopefully it wouldn't be at odds. But yeah, that's definitely another issue with healthcare as a whole, which again, having been somebody that worked at like a medical device company, it's like, you want to make money because you got to keep the business in business, but it's also sad to see how some companies do take advantage of patients or take advantage of how insurance reimbursements work. And oh man, I have essays we could write on that too. So
yeah, and make a big deal with the UN or something.
Yeah,
We'll get into that. Yeah. So since we're here to talk about your writing, let's go on to that now.
Yeah.
I mean, I would definitely love to have a whole podcast discussing healthcare and things like that as
well.
Oh
yeah, it's an interesting topic, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So what was your path to writing? Because you went into biomedical engineering, but it does sound like you chose the university you went to for a bit of both. What was your path to the point where you decided, oh, I'm going to write a science fiction novel now?
For me, let's see, I started, I mean, like it's kind of sound like probably like half the people you interview, like I was writing stories when I was little. I loved reading books like Goosebumps and Animorphs. That was my first exposure to horror and sci-fi. So there's all these very special stories that, kind of progressed me into things like reading Dune and Lord of the Rings. And then, and I would say in junior high, back when, and that would be when I was probably about around 12 years old, I started getting interested in writing. I wrote angsty poetry, like, many, many preteens and teenagers do. And then I had a friend in high school that we used to make short films together, pretty embarrassing short films, but I would start writing scripts for that. So that showed me that, oh, look, you can actually write a story, and I have the ability to do that if I put the time into it. And then in college, I think when I started getting more seriously into like that English degree, taking some writing workshops, I learned really kind of the fundamentals of how you actually write, not just, throwing a script together over the couple of weeks or something, but how you write a story, what it means to write, these characters that people can connect with, how you engage with your listener or reader or, whoever is consuming your writing. And I think my biggest takeaway was at that point was I had a writing instructor that said, if you want to be a writer, obviously you have to write. And the way to do that is make it a habit. And so he said, write 500 words a day. And so I started doing that after I graduated college, writing 500 words a day. And at first it was like short stories or, again, like little vignettes and stuff. And then I slowly started to put that together while I was in graduate school. I wrote a couple books that will never see the light of the day because they're even worse than my first books that were published. So it was just a matter of kind of snowballing that, realizing, oh, I can write books. And then of course, since I was doing the science stuff, I was like, hey, what if I wrote books that have like some scientist characters or a little bit of science in them? That's science fiction, so let's go with it.
And so you actually did decide to go into English, where you, like you said, you sort of really developed your writing awareness and skills there. You published your first book in 2014, is that right? That's what I sort of kind of got the idea from your website.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's when around that time started putting stuff out.
Right. And now you have a really extensive backlist. I was writing them all down. I can't even, more than a dozen series it looks like right now. So how quickly do you write then?
See, I usually it kind of depends on the book length, but when I was working full time, I was usually putting out maybe 4 books a year. And then now kind of depends on the year, but I think this year it's going to be maybe 8 or 9 books or something like that. And so I generally will try to do, I work in shifts with these books. So roughly it takes me like a month and a half to put a full length novel together, get it edited and sent to an editor. It takes longer than that to actually write the books, because then I'll have a couple rounds with the editors. But that's kind of my, like, I have a month and a half just really molding this book and sending it out to the editor, and that's when I kind of consider it done until I come back and get the edits. And so there's multiple of those going on at the same time, kind of a little bit of a factory
Right.
process going on.
And for listeners, your books they're not short. They're 450 pages kind of thing. So this is a good length of novel as well. So what is your process then? Take us through, because you've got these books going on, and you're going to get 8 to 9 out possibly a year, which is I can only dream about that kind of thing. But so what would be your process? Let's say you have multiple books on the go. You're writing. So I guess first let's start with, do you outline a lot then for your books?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think outline is really, for me, that's the key to productivity. I don't always follow the outline. Things might venture off in their own direction as I come up with better twists and better ideas, or I introduce new characters that I want to kind of bring into focus. But I'll spend actually time writing an outline, I'll spend a few days just writing an outline, and that usually ends up being maybe about 8,000 words or more. So basically that means like 10% of the novel length. Basically 10% of a novel length worth of outlining, if that makes sense.
Right.
So it's a pretty extensive outline by the time I'm done with it, but it's kind of a snowball where I come up with a concept and then I'm like, okay, here's some disasters that'll happen. Here's kind of some character growth I want to happen. How are we going to do that? I expand, one paragraph summary into like 3 paragraphs into a paragraph per chapter. And that's kind of where I stop my outline and start writing. And yeah, that process can take a long time too, because a lot of the ideas are just things that are burning in the background, kind of coming up with ideas. Actually writing it down, might be a few days, and then revising that. But I find that when I have that outline, the more extensive, the easier it is for me to kind of like start with the skeleton and start putting the meat on it, rather than starting from the ground up for me.
Right. So do you do the outlining process while you're writing another book, for example? So these are some of the simultaneous processes that are going on?
Yeah, I've experimented with all kinds of methods. So I'm not exactly sure what the best way is for me. But for instance, I'll be writing book 4 in a series, and at the same time, sometimes I'll wait till I'm close to the end of that book, and then I'll outline book 5. I've also tried to outline like books 4, 5, and 6 together, but then I find like, by the time I'm at the end of book 4, I want to change things around. So 5 and 6 have to completely change. So I'm doing a lot more work. But right now, for instance, I've outlined book 6 in my Sunken Spaceship series. I'm writing that book now. And as I'm doing that, I'm slowly piecing together some outlines for 2 other different series. And there's no pressure on those 2 other different series because they'll be the first book in their series. So it's a little easier for me to kind of in the evening when I'm done, with the keyboard, kind of just slowly brainstorm that out over a few weeks instead of trying to flesh that outline out in, 3 days. So yeah, I've done a whole mix of it. It really just depends on where I'm at in this series, and what ideas, what shiny ideas are distracting me from my current work.
So how many words might you write a day then?
I shoot for, so 5,000 is kind of my minimum. And I'm always really bad. I think that's about like 10 Microsoft single space pages for people who don't count in words. And then that's my minimum. And then my stretch goal is usually 7,500. There are days where when I'm really on a roll and all I want to do is write, and I'm doing that from sun up to sundown, where I might get in, like 12,000 to 15,000 words. But those ones are like once a month. Most of the time it's between 5,000 to 7,500 words.
Right. And that's a far cry from the 500 words a day then.
Yeah, it was, that's a good point, because that took a long time to kind of build those muscles. And I do find like if I take a break from writing for too long, I have to rebuild it. I'll start with a few thousand words and then I have to rebuild it again. So it's definitely just like exercising or running or something. You just have to keep at it to kind of keep at that level.
Okay, I was wondering about that because some people are just sort of stream of consciousness writers. But so it's interesting that you sort of have to like go to the gym or something to go to the writing gym, as it were. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's one of those things where it doesn't. I had another writing friend kind of say like, it doesn't get easier, you just get stronger. And he's also was a personal trainer. And I'm like, oh man, that's a great like kind of description for that. Where 5,000 words is still can be hard to do, but you just get better at doing it. I think as soon as like I find myself like if I take 2 weeks off writing and then I try to go back at it, I just can't be as productive. It's just a mind focus kind of thing that definitely affects it.
Right. So then what would be your process to, let's say, because you have the, let's say, writing, editing, publishing process going for multiple books at a time. So once you finish the, let's say, first draft of a book, what would be the process for that book? And then simultaneously, what else are you doing with other books?
Yes, I'll usually, so if like if I start at the beginning of a series, first book, as soon as I get my first draft done, I go through a couple of revisions and edits on my own. And when I'm done with that, I'll send that off to my first editor, who usually looks at a combination of kind of developmental stuff and just line edits, depending on how mature they think the story is at that time. And while my editor has it, I've either already outlined or I'm just starting to write the first draft of the second book. So I'll have that first draft, and hopefully by the time the editor sends me back the revisions for book one, I'm done with the first or second draft on book two. So I can quickly get those edits done from the editor, send it back to them for a second round of edits, or send it to my proofreader if that's where we're at. And then while that other book goes off to the next round of editing, I'm finalizing my book two, and then that goes to the editor. When it goes to the editor, I'm immediately on book three. So it's kind of that chain. Right now, I'm just about to turn in book 4 of Sunken Spaceship to my editors over at Athon Books. And while that came in the middle of almost finishing book 6. So I'm almost finished with the first draft of book 6. And as soon as this is off to the editor, I'm going to finish book 6, and I'll have that off to them probably before they give me the proofread version of book 5. So
Wow,
kind of juggling those things at the same time. And as I do that, I'm slowly putting some outlines together of some other different series that I mentioned. So kind of brainstorming some ideas, making things more mature. And I find like having these background ideas of these books that I've been thinking about for maybe, a couple months to a year gives me time to kind of really flesh out the characters and plot in those books. And that happens when I'm not working on my main series at the moment.
Right. So you must spend a lot of time at your desk then with all this. So what kind of routine do you have to keep yourself from getting physically destroyed with like computer body or something?
One of the best things I did recently was get a standing desk. And I find working 8 hours by yourself, 8 hours or more by yourself, at the desk, you're not talking to anybody, gets definitely physically and mentally draining. So when I find myself in the middle of the afternoon, I'm starting to get tired. I bring my desk up, and I've got like a balance board so I can kind of do my steps back and forth, and that helps just to get the blood flowing, right? Going back and forth. But I'm also big into running. So I like long distance running. We're really lucky out here. The weather out here in Colorado is pretty good most of where I am in Colorado, at least, is pretty good most of the year. So I'm running out there 11 out of 12 months outside, get a little taste of nature. Great time to think and go through some other audiobooks. So I'm fueling kind of my writing, but then also getting all those steps in. If I'm shooting for 10,000 steps, I go get them on one run rather than, throughout the day like I used to when I was working at the lab, walking back and forth. So it's a battle, but for me, I've got to be just as diligent about getting outside and working out as I am about getting the words on the screen.
Yeah, that's excellent. I'm a bit jealous that you can do outdoor stuff 11 months a year. I think we'd hurt ourselves trying to do that here.
Yeah.
I have lived in places where I could do that. I miss them a little bit, to be honest.
Oh yeah. No, I love, even when it's cold out here, because we're at such a high altitude, atmosphere is a little thinner. So the sun hits you in the middle of the day, and it feels like it feels comfortable. So it's nice to get out, go for a hike or go for a run. And the only time that we're not doing that really is when we get the snowstorm. But then you wait 2 days, that melts, and you're off. You're off on the trails again.
Yeah. Nothing like the north of the northern hemisphere where we.
Yeah.
So you have published through 2 publishers that I can tell. As you mentioned, Athon Books, and I've had a number of authors from Athon Books. And then you have your own, is that right? Firehawk Press?
Yeah, that's right. So I have my own that I formalized a few years ago, and then I've worked with Athon, and then I have worked both like with some more of the traditional publishers for audiobooks. So that's a whole different beast, as well as published some on my own.
Right. The book that I listened to in preparation for this was the Dead Man's War book 1. So I listened to the audiobook, which I think was done by Podium, was it?
Yeah, that's right. And RC Brain narrating that back. Yeah, that was 3 years ago. I had to think to make sure I had that right. But yeah.
Yeah, so many books in the meantime. I got to go back and yeah, no, it was really well done. I've listened to a lot of books from Podium as well. Did they seek you out? I mean, did you just approach them and say, "Look, I've got some good books for you. I love if you could." I mean, how do you set up a deal like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Back when so that story actually starts before Deadman's War. Back when I published Eternal Frontier, which is my first foray into military science fiction in space, and that book did pretty well out the gates on Kindle. And a lot of these like smaller audiobook publishers at the time were kind of scouting out books that were popping up in the ranks on Kindle books. And so I had a few different publishers approach me and ask if I would want to make an audiobook with them. And so of course, at that time I was also lucky to have an agent that I kind of looked into, which is a whole different story. And so he helped me navigate those deals. Those first books, those first sci-fi books, I went with Blackstone Audio, and they did a nice job producing those books. And then when I came back around with the Dead Man's War series, at the time my agent was helping me. We're actually pitching to traditional publishers to do the Kindle paperback and audio and just do the whole shebang. But the best interest we got was from Podium, and they also could have R.C. Bray, which I love R.C. Bray's narration. And they said, "Oh, we could have R.C. Bray on this book as well if you go with us." And so I was like, "Oh man, you got me sold. I'd love to hear R.C. Bray read Dead Man's War." So that's kind of how that happened. And again, that was my agent that time being proactive in pitching it, so we could kind of time the audiobook release with the Kindle release instead of me just throwing the Kindle book out into the world and seeing what happens.
Right. And so speaking of seeing what happens, you have a good number of reviews on your book. So how do you go about promoting? Because that is one of the things that indie authors especially have the most trouble with, and it's the most disliked part of their job, basically.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I'm learning more about that every day, and it's a tough battle. So I empathize, because back in the day, like when I first started, you used to just be able to drop your book to 99 cents, and then you would promote it via a few different newsletters that were like smaller versions of BookBub, like e-reader news today. There was free Kindle books and tips, which unfortunately no longer exists, but that was a great one. There's still some like Robin Reads and Discover Sci-Fi that are really good. Newsletter lists like that will reach out to people who sign up to those newsletters specifically to know when there are good book deals. And back when I first started, that's all you had to do was promote on that. If people like it, it does well, and then it continues to do well for the next few months as you're publishing more series. And it's real easy. And then you pop up in other people's also bots on Amazon. So when people go and buy one book, they see under there, "Oh, look, customers also bought this book." Now a lot of those also bots on Amazon are pay to play. So unfortunately, I'm paying for some ads through Amazon. I tried my hand at Facebook ads. So I have, I'm not a ad wizard or anything like that, but I try my hands at all these different things. Still doing kind of those periodic sales. BookBub is still a great way to reach a ton of readers. And I found even recently, like with Dead Man's War, that kind of series kind of faded away. And then I did a BookBub, and all of a sudden it's back with a bunch, thousands of new readers in a small period of time, which is really cool. So it's a combination of kind of some of that old school newsletter stuff. I keep my own newsletter. I have a Facebook page that I'm not super great at keeping updated, but I try to interact with readers and stuff through that as well. So that's I think that's the bird's eye view of most everything I'm doing right now.
And if you had an author come to you and said, okay, yeah, and you're going to give them like the one piece of advice for marketing, to sort of kickstart their, let's say, awareness of their books, because you can't guarantee sales, of course, but what would that be, do you think?
So hopefully, I'm assuming this author will already have a series that they've written or they're writing, because I think it's not worth advertising until you have at least 3 books out, that magic number. Because usually book one is going to be, if you're going to be advertising, it's your loss leader. You're going to lose money advertising it. So you want those next 2 books for readers to latch on to, and you want to show that you're going to be dedicated to writing. So number one is probably just making sure you actually have a series. And I think I think a lot of people gravitate towards series because they like to see characters that they're interested in. They like to kind of grow up with these characters, have fun adventures with the same characters, kind of be friends with, kind of you form these relationships with these characters. So honestly, the best marketing advice is to come up with a good series. And then if we're talking about practical, actual advertising, stuff like that, I think it's hard for me to pick one thing. But if I had to only say one thing at that point when you do your series is make sure you have a newsletter so readers don't forget about you and you can stay in contact with your readers. After that, since I'm going to take this one thing and really going to twist this question and keep adding to it,
That's fine.
I think getting involved in whatever advertising venue you feel comfortable and figuring out how to make it work for you. I don't do TikTok. A lot of authors I know have success with that. Maybe that's where you go. Facebook, some people have success, some people don't. Amazon, same thing. But I think picking one and just kind of focusing on that, making sure that you can reach your readers through that particular venue. For instance, in TikTok, I'm not sure that sci-fi does as well on TikTok as like romance or romantasy or even fantasy. So TikTok might not be great for sci-fi, but learning how to use Amazon ads might be better for sci-fi. And that I think picking one of those things and learning the ropes on that right away is probably the best way rather than trying to do everything at once and nothing works.
Right, exactly. So speaking of sci-fi, then, is there one platform that you've discovered is best for sci-fi?
I think for audio, I think Facebook still rules at reaching audio audiences, and a lot of readers I've interacted with in the last few years have really come from audio, and I think a lot of my readers are into audio, which I never would have predicted that 6-7 years ago. But Facebook still rules at that. It's easier to narrow down your audience, and especially when you can offer a really good deal, like, hey, here's like 25 hours of an audiobook for one Audible credit. Right. That's great for the Audible user who only has a certain amount of credits, and it's great for you because it's easy to say like, hey, this series is fun and it's a great value for you. So that's kind of easy advertising. And then for I think Amazon ads, now that we have to pay to have our books shown around on Amazon, it's like for sci-fi, it does seem like it's one of the most successful ways to hit the sci-fi readers besides those periodic newsletter blasts.
Right. Okay. So as we've mentioned, and obviously, you write a lot of military sci-fi. So I read, listened to the Dead Men Book 1 Sentinel. And first of all, it was really well done. I really enjoyed it. And you do write primarily military sci-fi. It was interesting that you did note military sci-fi in space at one point, because would you list some of your series, like what was the series called? The Tide, I think, as sort of terrestrial military sci-fi?
Yeah, I think so. So I kind of I guess when I first wrote The Tide, I actually was really kind of like inspired by James Rowland's of Sigma Force. So it's a thriller, but it's about kind of these, if people aren't familiar with it, the main characters are a team of people basically who have military experience, but then they're also trained in a specific science. So that's right up my alley. I love that. So there's all these adventures that are a combination of military action, a little bit of archaeology and history, and science. So sign me up for any of those books immediately. And then also Clive Cussler, The Oregon Files, is about a group of mercenaries. A lot of them have CIA, espionage experience, or military experience, and they're going around solving kind of like these world-ending mysteries that combine a little bit of history with some technology and stuff. And that to me is also kind of a version of military thrillers. You of course have like Tom Clancy, which to me is a great example of terrestrial military thriller type writing. And so for me, the military science fiction is predominantly, of course, to me, that is really more in space. So if I'm advertising books for military science fiction, I'm predominantly talking about spaceships. And then military thrillers to me are kind of more the terrestrial stuff, or at least that's what I see how Amazon divides things up. And so I've kind of written books that some are very relegated to one like very military thriller, and some are very military sci-fi, and some kind of cross that line.
Right. I mean, so you have the science background for the science fiction part, but how much research did you have to do for the military side of it?
I had to do a lot for that. I myself am not, never served. So it's basically reading a lot of biographies, reading military history stuff, trying to do my best, the military is such a complicated and intricate organization. Even individual stories through the military are so complicated, to somebody who's not familiar with how military structure works, what military life is like on the daily life. So I do my best to try to get that accurate. Don't always succeed, but I do have family members in the service that I kind of lean on when I have questions and like, am I getting this right? I've had a number of readers that are also in the military, so it's nice to have kind of those resources to help me do the best I can do as someone looking into the military from the outside.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if you had anyone to run stuff by, because yeah, especially in the US, isn't it? People can get very touchy about certain things, can't
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, one of my favorite examples kind of is like drill sergeants. I guess, or a drill instructor, I should say. See, I already messed that up. But like a drill instructor, if you have like somebody who's coming into boot camp, and I'm going to leave this in the broadest terms, and they're like, "Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am," and you're talking to a drill instructor who's a non-commissioned officer, I believe, or somebody basically who isn't the commissioned officer. You're not actually supposed to be using sir or ma'am with them, whereas you're supposed to do that with the commissioned officer. That kind of like those. I'm generalizing here, but those kind of like little rules that a lot of us, like when we're not in the service, like we don't know, because all we know is our military exposure through like movies and stuff,
they? Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And so it can get really dicey if you don't like pay attention to those little things. And like I said, I get things wrong all the time. So I'm trying to, I think one of the things I try to focus on is getting kind of the feelings, the brotherhood, that kind of stuff, the stuff that I can understand easier and know better. Try to get that right while soaking in as much of the biographies and research to try to get that stuff right. Because yeah, like you said, readers will notice if they've had service experience, and they'll let you know for sure.
So I mean, with a lot of your military and non-military sci-fi, I mean, obviously they're driven by the science part of the science fiction as well, and you have like a wide range of different sort of future sciences that you have brought in. There's a large number of apocalyptic scenarios as well. Well, if I guess let's first touch on that. Is that something that you think about a lot, or is it one of those things that, oh, that makes a very dramatic story, so let's go that way?
Yeah, I think when I was first getting into sci-fi and stuff, I really was drawn to kind of the apocalyptic and dystopian books. I just like to, like what happens if everything we know is just taken away from us, or is transformed in a way that we don't recognize, or we go 1,000 years in the future and everything that's comfortable for us is now, uncomfortable. And so I like to imagine that from the fictional point of view. I try not to think about that on the regular, and I don't want to be too sad about the world. So,
Well, I was going to
it's more
ask,
fun to think
is it
about the
preparing you
fictional
for
way.
the current reality, basically?
Yeah, no, I'll be horribly unprepared.
um, so you do have a lot of bioengineering. Now, as I mentioned, I've read Dead Man's War, and well, the first one again, um, which has some really interesting bioengineering in there. Was that inspired in any way by your work? And maybe you can, whatever you're comfortable with telling the listeners that won't be spoilers, feel free to share some of that. I'm never quite sure how much spoiler I can
Yeah,
give.
for sure. I mean, yeah, like you cut on, like I love bioengineering work, so I'm always kind of slice that into my books, um, and and with with uh, with Dead Man's War, I was really into. I was like mech suits. I like this idea of being. I grew up playing like mech warrior video games, and then reading and watching like Gundam, and so all these different like mech suits. I love that kind of thing. I also liked the kaiju, or the giant monsters, the stories with where you have things like Godzilla, or Cloverfield, or things like that, where you bring in these massive monsters and they're kind of destructive. So of course, like I wanted to write a sci-fi story with that, and so the big bioengineering component of Dead Man's War, which is I think kind of the twist that I wanted to have on the genre, which I think is fine to share, is instead of driving mechs, because of the characters basically go through an ordeal that prohibits them from being able to pilot these normal mech suits, these complicated mech suits that they were trained on. And so they're kind of these expendable soldiers that no longer have the military career that they've been training for. And then in a desperate situation, they're basically, they resurrect a pilot program that these bioengineers and researchers used to be working on, where the kaiju, the giant monsters that are constantly in the way of the humans, basically, are able to be piloted. So my mechs actually pilot those monsters instead of just normal mech suits. And so I loved kind of creating the technology behind that, mixing in a little bit of mechanical engineering, electrical engineering with some of my bioengineering experience. And that series there's a lot of hand waving, of course. I don't know how you actually pilot a giant monster, but I can make up some fun technologies to make it kind of make sense. And that's inspired by a lot of technologies I ran into in my engineering field that I worked with, but also other engineers, like I said, in other fields, that I thought their research was really cool and I wanted to integrate. And so you see that kind of stuff constantly, I think, in my books.
Yeah. I was interested that you mentioned the video games because that was one of the things I thought of when I was reading the book. Was it definitely had that potential, for the mechs, the different classes of mechs. And then I was thinking, oh, well, I wonder if you have any plans to make a video game, or, for example, a lit RPG series, because that's another way that you could see this going. I mean, the similar kind of thing, leveling up, changing mechs and stuff, and getting new skills and things like that. Especially, I think Athon does specialize in lit RPG, don't they?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, at the time I wrote Dead Man's War, I didn't have any, or didn't anticipate turning it into a lit RPG. That being said, I enjoy a few different lit RPG series. That's one of those series that I'm kind of noodling with and working on myself right now. But if somebody wants to make Dead Man's War into a video game, I would play the crap out of that. So, so please check it out if you're a video game developer. Yeah.
Yeah, I could see it being popular for sure. It's definitely got all the features you need. Yeah. So there is another part to this, which is not uncommon in certain military sci-fi, and that's kind of the progenitor feature. I mean, I think they even had it in Star Trek, if I remember, at some point. But it brings up for me interesting ideas on like panspermia and well, our own history. For example, I've gotten quite interested in let's say, call it alternative ancient history. So I mean, how much did you sort of approach that? And I'm also interested in your thoughts on how much you feel that's a possible reality, for example.
That's a good question. So I think with Dead Man's War, without like spoiling too much, I was interested in, kind of that chicken or egg question. How do all these different life forms, where are they coming from, who's creating them? Very much like, I can think of like, of course, like the Alien series, Prometheus, that kind of stuff too. What would it be like to meet these people that created all these different life forms? What if they created you? Like, all those interactions. I just think it's always a fun question in sci-fi. So I did my own take on that kind of stuff, which slowly gets answered throughout that series. I don't know. I think that's just a fun concept that can go in so many different directions because it wrestles with so many fundamental questions of what it means to be human, about where do we come from? Are we original? Did somebody else make us? How, what, is there a God? How many gods? All those things that I think humanity has wrestled with for a long time. And it's obviously really important to our existence and just kind of like how we navigate life. So of course, those, when we can kind of play with those questions and kind of turn them on their head in sci-fi, I had to throw my hat in the ring and attempt to play around with that. But yeah.
Yeah. Do you have a thought on human existence at the moment? Are you leaning any direction, like revolved on Earth or came to Earth in some other way?
I mean, I would say like it'd be more fun if we came from a different planet, but I'm going to go with, if I had to bet right now, I would have to say we're from Earth, and we probably have some really boring stories. I like seeing. I mean, I think as humans we're just kind of nuts, and so when it's like, how did we spread from this continent to this island? And then you're like, oh man, you could do. Here's these boats that these people have traveled on. Like it's more convenient if somebody just kind of like spread us out. But then when you learn that no, we're humans, we're just really cool. Like we're willing to risk our lives to do these crazy stunts to spread and adapt to the places where we probably shouldn't live, or we're all these other animal species that are just relegated to where they are. We're like, no, we're going to figure out how we're going to make it happen. And so I think to me, like that's kind of the fun story to look beyond that and just figure out like how humans did that on their own. Because I think those stories are just so compelling about how we're explorers. And that kind of leads to all these explorers in space that I like to write about, is like, how are humans doing that on their own? That being said, it's always fun to get the jump start and think about how aliens, could have spread that or impacted that, or how these life forms that we couldn't even understand as magic might affect things. But I think I want to believe that's more fiction, because if something was that powerful that they could spread our life, we're like ants to them. And I don't want to think of us as ants, because then that means we can be stepped on that quickly.
So I'm guessing you're not religious then.
I'm not crazy religious, but yeah.
Maybe spiritual, but not religious.
Yeah, there you go. I think that's a good example of my kind of life philosophy and stuff. I have nothing against any beliefs that people have, but I've got my own kind of spiritual beliefs, I'd say.
Yeah. One thing with regards to that, I guess, human drive to go anywhere is, do you feel it feels like we've kind of stalled out a little bit? Do you read it that way? I mean, it looks like the next stage, which is a big stage, but relatively speaking, is it as big as going from Indonesia to South America by canoe? I don't know. Right.
Yeah, no, you're so right.
Yeah. So have we just become too cautious? Have we stalled out? Or do you think we're just going to rediscover that drive and eventually in the next maybe 20 years actually?
I feel like we need some competition to like put a fire under our butt again, right? Because it's like when you have the space race and you have, race to who's going to be the first person in space and the first man on the moon, and you have that drive to succeed for no other reason than to succeed, then people start putting money behind that. I think our exploration just takes a lot more money and resources than it used to, where it's like, hey, we just have to be brave, maybe a little stupid, and sit in this canoe for a while. Like that. That's one thing versus like, okay, well now that canoe has to go to space and it has to keep a person alive for 3 months, and they have to deal with all kinds of radiation. How are they going to survive? What's the bathroom situation like? What if there's a disaster? Like, how expensive would it be to send another person in our space canoe? So I think like it's that kind of like we're going up a steeper and steeper hill. The same kind of oh man, is it Moore's law, if I'm saying that right, in computer? Yeah, where it's like, I guess like you've got kind of a progress and you've got this exponential progress, but eventually we do hit kind of this like diminishing returns, right? Where it's harder and harder to progress.
Because what I'm wondering about is that sort of asymptote we're reaching, is that due to us changing? Because going across the ocean, yes, you don't have to bring, you can go to the bathroom in the ocean probably. You don't have to bring your air with you. Yeah. You can catch food in the ocean, but probably a lot of them died, I imagine, as well. And we seem, like you said, like, okay, how easy it is to rescue someone on the way to Mars. I feel like we wouldn't have necessarily planned for that in the past, right? We would have just said, okay, let's do all we can. You ship them off to Mars, and yeah, unfortunately, some people might die, but it ultimately forwards the human race. But now we're sort of hyper worried about people. I mean, I don't want to say it, sounds very callous of me, but we're very concerned that someone might die on this trip out of the 8 billion people on the planet.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because it's like with Andy Weir's The Martian book, right? You have this entire mission centered around saving this one astronaut. And we all believe, right? When we buy into that book, we're like, yeah, they would spend this money. They would do all these crazy stunts to save this one man. And it's kind of weird, right? That we're, I mean, that's a whole philosophical quandary when we're like, oh, but we'll let these people starve in the streets, or these other people die in these other countries, but we're going to save this one person on Mars, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But we really do. Yeah, we put a lot of stipulations into saving life, I guess, when we can. I don't know.
It's weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was a good example you just gave, because we've got, how many thousands to millions of homeless people, and big chunks of the world still, I mean, they're working to build that up, but there's still big chunks of the world in extreme poverty.
Yeah.
And now I do think that moving into space is still crucially important for the human race. But at the same point, yeah, how can you justify spending all that money to save one person in space when that money could save thousands, tens of thousands on Earth? Yeah, it's a strange question, isn't it? You do have a number of, a couple of books anyway that dig into DNA modification and artificial organs. So I think Black Market DNA and the God Organ, and I think Tide as well. Am I right? Tide had biowarfare. That's like, is that a zombie one? I got the impression.
Yeah. Tide was my take on. So I did those other biotech type thrillers, and they never really took off. They weren't super popular. So I had a friend of mine, actually Nick Sansbury Smith, who wrote The Extinction Cycle. And at the time as that was taking off, he told me, "Hey, I helped him like design kind of the science for his monsters, and even like the cures and stuff that he would use for his monsters throughout his series. And he's like, you need to do that for your own book. Why aren't you doing that?" And that's how the Tide came about. So yeah, a lot of bioweapons, but then also a lot of, actually, I did some polymer engineering, biomaterial engineering, therapeutic engineering, like the good side of science too. So that was kind of a nice blending of all the stuff that I did research in, or have friends that did research in at the time.
Right, because I find it quite interesting, that particular side of science fiction, because it's reaching a reality. I mean, your field yourself, 3D printing organs and things like that, and biomaterials. Now, I mean, I was in biochemistry in the past. That's where my background is. And there was always the promise of, let's say, we called it at the time pharmacogenetics, the idea of personalized medicine based on your DNA, which hasn't really been realized.
Yeah.
At least not yet, anyway. But what I'm wondering, so we had recently COVID, of course, with the vaccine issue. If we had gene therapies, for example, or not even therapies, let's say they were non-medical intervention or options would be a good way to put it. How likely do you think that they would be adapted, and what issues might actually be faced by people? Because I mean, the vaccine now, it is coming out that there are issues potentially with it. So we're attempting to mess with our own DNA. It has things we haven't considered. And so how do you think that would sort of be rolled out, and would it be adopted, or would people sort of be scared?
Yeah, I think so. There's a lot of layered, or a lot of nuance to that kind of technology. I think one of the primary issues actually with like personalized medicine is how hard it is to scientifically test, because almost everything that's out in the US, you either have to, I guess I'm going to simplify a ton of things, but the FDA makes sure that you've ensured that this works in people and isn't going to kill people, or it will have minimal side effects, or the payoff is great enough that it's worth the side effects. And so we have these regulatory bodies that, if you look at the history of the FDA, are absolutely necessary, because you look at types of medicines people were taking before the FDA, and the FDA was basically founded. I can't remember the name of the medicine, but it basically resulted in a ton of awful birth defects. And then the government's like, hey, we need somebody to put a check on this so that a company just can't make this terrible medicine that kills a whole bunch of people, or like creates all these awful birth defects. And so then that's where the FDA came from, right? But it uses the scientific method to test whether or not medicine's going to work, or a medical device, whether that's a hip implant or it's some kind of genetic therapy. And in order to test that it works, you need a whole population that is willing to be like, hey, yeah, like, yeah, let's try this out. I'm desperate. I need some help with this medicine, with this therapeutic, because you don't want to be throwing something in people that you don't know how it works. And so you collect all this data over, years of experiments or months of experiments or just years of data that you can then compile and say like, okay, this works or this doesn't work. This isn't worth the payoff. The risk is too great. With personalized medicine, if I feel like that's so iffy because it's like, okay, well, we're going to modify these genes in a person. Right now, we're not at a place where we could replicate that in a way to make sure it's safe. And so I think the FDA is actually, I have friends that work at the FDA, and I did research with the FDA, and so they're actively working on how do we regulate personalized medicine to protect people while making sure it advances. And that's same thing with 3D printed organs, which I worked with. So there's a whole conversation ongoing on how we make that. So I think that's the first step, is like, how do we make that safe for people so companies aren't just promising things that they can't deliver, or promising things and then hurting patients. And so that's a constant war between the FDA and companies that just want to get their product out, like you said earlier, like big pharma and stuff. And it's a constant war, and we've got all these people that I know that are just scientists trying to do the best they can to make sense of that and have these conversations. So that's probably like the hardest thing to like overcome, is how do we make sure things are safe, honestly, and how do we do that in a way that's replicable. And then the second thing is, then there are people that I think put that whole question, make it moot, because if you look into kind of like the biohacking movement with CRISPR, so basically it's a very accessible, easy way to kind of do some genetic engineering. You could theoretically like have, with a few $100s, create a CRISPR lab in your garage. And there were some people that tried to biohack their own genes and inject themselves with these basically try to genetic engineer themselves. I think it was to increase muscle mass or something like that. It didn't work, but there are people willing to do that and inject this stuff in themselves, which I think is absolutely nuts. I would never do that.
Yeah, that's
but
crazy.
people are willing to do that, so they'll bypass that. So it's like, I think it's kind of like that brave/foolish thing that we were talking about earlier. Maybe some people are willing to inject that in themselves and be the first guinea pigs with their own homegrown experiments, for better or worse, and they're going to do it. And that's probably going to happen as some of this tech becomes more accessible, kind of like computers, where the price comes down. It's easier to replicate things, easier to do these things in your garage bioengineering lab, which is part of what some of my series tackles, all those nuances in the black market DNA and the God organ stuff. But yeah.
Yeah,
very, very complicated.
yeah. I mean, one of the things that's, I think, well, was apparent to me for a while was the idea that technology is advancing fast enough. And again, coming from a biofield, it's even more obvious in a biofield, because you can see that you can get the materials more easily. And that one person, we're getting to the point, eventually it'll converge to the point where one person can have potentially dramatic effects on the world based on what they do. Like, let's say the creation of a virus or something like that. Yeah, so that's quite frightening. And then you wonder, well, is that going to drive authoritarian governments to be even more strict in some ways?
Right. No, yeah, it's like it's frightening, the stuff that we're capable of doing ourselves. And then at the same time, we've accidentally done this by like with overprescribing drugs, or creating, in hospitals, we have antibiotic resistant bacteria that kind of make their way around. It's just like, even stuff that we're not doing deliberately, oh crap, we've kind of got these things. If you ever want to scare yourself, start looking at how we treat fungal diseases, and how we're just lucky that fungi have evolved, that our body temperature is high enough to basically kill them. But like if they become just a tiny bit more temperature resistant, we are in so much trouble. so there's all those threats too, and it's like between nature and man, it's a crazy arms race.
Well, it just shows you, I think we've reached a point in our technology that the average person will feel like, oh, we know all this stuff. We know how to do this. We know how to do that. And my wife faces it as a doctor. in the hospitals where people just expect, and she always tells them, I don't have a magic wand. I can't fix you.
Mm-hmm.
And they just expect it without realizing it. Like, you have to be a specialist kind of to realize how precarious so much of this is, right? Like you just said with the fungal stuff, and with the antibiotic resistant bacteria and things like that. And then there's like negatively synergistic issues. Now, this is just my speculation, but we see issues with, let's say, in light of the jab related to COVID, we see a lot of excess deaths still and heart related issues. And it's my thoughts that, because I've now discovered a lot of people I know who found that they have heart issues, including our daughter, for example. And I feel like, have you ever seen the movie Dark Waters? I bring this one up. So this is basically 3M dumping their Teflon byproducts into the environment.
Oh yeah.
Which have disastrous effects on animals, including us, of course, if they get concentrated enough. So my speculation is that these chemicals in the environment are causing small effects in us that maybe aren't noticeable under normal circumstances, but you stress them enough, and then that causes disaster. So that's like a negative synergy between different aspects of our industries, basically, which are unforeseen because we're not aware that they're there, basically, right?
Right, until it's too late.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point with a lot of our technology nowadays, where we're trying to do the best we can to predict effects. And then there's, of course, if you're a company, the general premise of the company is to make as much money as possible. So to ignore those negative effects as much as possible, right? So we have these competing interests here for sure. And I think one thing, like you talked about, is we're kind of like damned if we do, damned if we don't when it comes to anything related to your immune system or inflammatory system, because anything that goes into your body that's not supposed to be there, whether that's macroplastics or even, like the results of a vaccine are that it causes some kind of inflammatory response because you're trying, like in the case of microplastics, or like ingesting something that you're not supposed to ingest, your body's trying to get it out, right? And so your body's going into this hyperactive stress state. Very complicated process, but it's basically working to eject stuff, and then you're stressing your body out. And this is the same with whether you catch an infection. It's like you're talking about with the cardiovascular stuff. Anytime you're dealing with inflammation, your heart working overtime, or you get inflammation in your cardiovascular tissues, that's not great either. So you've got your immune system working overtime to try to fight whatever it thinks is invading it. And man, yeah, like it's like people I know that have had COVID really bad have cardiovascular effects too, that just like debilitating long-term effects because of that inflammation.
Yeah.
And it's more of that kind of battle, which I think makes for intriguing fiction, awful reality, which is like, how do we combat these things that we just barely understand? Yeah.
It makes us think. Well, it's a crazy time, because as a lifelong science fiction fan, now being faced with some science fiction becoming reality, and you can, like you say, we can see the negative sides of this. Like before it's actually reality, it's all like, oh, that's so cool, look what we could do. And then when you're faced with the reality, all of a sudden you're like, oh well, it's not all good, there's a lot of negative stuff, you have to balance this and everything, right? Yeah.
I like that. I mean, I like that in science fiction, for instance, and I'm a big proponent of I think there needs to be conversations between people in science and people in philosophy and English, history, sociology, because just like technology, it's impossible for any one human to understand all of human history. If you ever try to claim you understand all of history, or how the government works, or how the economy works, and like, unless you're an expert in that field, you probably don't. I mean, the one thing I learned about being a PhD in bioengineering is how much I don't understand. And so I think as the world kind of necessarily becomes kind of like isolated to advance these particular fields, or to know everything there possibly is to know about this field, there's so much separation that people become siloed. So I might forget I'm pursuing this research project, and I might not know how that affects the economy. I might not know how that'll affect an individual's sense of their self, or how how, oh, this is a parallel of, something that happened in history previously. Or, hey, how about an ethicist who can say, like, hey, did you think about this, the ramifications of this? And I guess pulling all that together, science fiction is like a nice playground for us to kind of bring those conversations, where I think it's accessible for people who are, maybe they're right brain or left brain focused, but it's a place where we kind of talk about technology. We talk about the ramifications of it. We have a lot of fun on the way, but maybe plant those seeds and where we can kind of think about, like, hey, let's think about this technology that looks really awesome. What are the bad sides? Or this technology that's really scary. How do we make that useful for ourselves? And I mean, we see it with AI too right now, right? I mean, we all know the Terminator, and then we also see all these people promising us how great AI is going to be. And I love this meme right now where, like, people talk about, well, I wanted AI to do the vacuuming and wash my dishes so I could be the one creating art. But now we have AI that's creating our art instead of doing the stuff like that we don't want to do. And then you kind of like have that question as a human. What's the point of this tool if it's like making my life more miserable? Because I have to focus on the miserable stuff and it's stealing the part that brings us joy or our purpose or whatever. So man, yeah, those conversations are everywhere in science fiction, which I love. So besides having a lot of fun, I would love for more people in these different fields to have these conversations when they're doing research. But also, if you can't do that, at least read some sci-fi.
That's a good selling point. Yes. Yeah, that's really amazing, isn't it? Because AI is a weird tool in a way, I think, compared to new tools in the past, in that it is removing some of the upper level jobs and leaving the lower level jobs, because those ones are harder to replace by this type of technology, isn't it? And I tell my wife, like, look, you pretty soon can be replaced by an AI, like as a doctor, more like, I mean, you can't do the physical, but all you have to do is put scanners around. So, that's something that's not that far away potentially. And obviously they leave managers like to monitor the stuff. But, in scientific research, I finished my PhD just sort of as robotic labs were coming in large scale. So, suddenly you had one technician running an entire lab, which was amazing. And in biochemistry, so I did site-directed mutagenesis, for example, to study enzymes. And you go back to the beginning of biotech in the 70s, and an entire PhD just to make one clone. And then you get to, mine was in the 90s, where you're doing like half a dozen clones and the structure of all the proteins, purifying the enzymes and the enzymology. And then you fast forward another 10 years and you've got like one person with an entire lab just studying everything, basically, if they want, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just the rapidity of the advancement. But then, you have less people and you're expected to do more and more and more.
Yeah. I mean, and you know how that is, like, even just contributing to that knowledge, you got to get these very specific, hard to answer questions. Whereas it used to be like, hey, I'll develop one novel molecule. It may or may not work, but it's cool. Like, that's my entire PhD, one paper. And now it's like, you got to publish 5 or 6 papers. All these questions that you have to answer. Like you said, like I was in bioengineering doing 3D printing work. And I was lucky that I was at the forefront of kind of 3D printing being popular. So I was just creating a material that kind of worked. And then the next people have to create a material that's really good for this very specific application. And like you said, it's going under that same kind of narrow focus. But then at the same time, all the automated labs where all of a sudden, as a graduate student, I'm sure you're like, I don't want to be doing like moving liquids from one tiny well to another all day.
Yeah,
I can just click go on this experiment. But it does totally change the dynamic and kind of the bar, or what do I want to say, the kind of the goalpost of where success is.
Yeah. And I feel like the biochemical, biomedical scientists, we were kind of in the forefront of this kind of revolution in a way. Right now, with AI, sort of everyone is at the same point where it's like, oh my God, my job is changing completely. And, a monkey can do it in some ways, right? My cat walking across the keyboard might get lucky or something. I don't know.
Right.
Frightening. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, I guess that's one of those conversations where it's like, these AIs are not trained to be human. They're trained to replicate what they've already read, and now they're reading material that, like the language learning algorithms, I guess in particular, are learning what each other are putting out. So it's this constant like fill of AI garbage that they're learning from. And I think it goes back to the sci-fi stuff. It's nice to at least have a human manager behind that to kind of be like, hey, should we be doing this?
Yeah.
Like, let's not just do these experiments for the experiment's sake because the AI says this is the next step. But like, should we be doing this? What's the ramifications of that? Which I think even my experience with trying to use AI to come up with science and technology related stuff, it's wrong a lot. It's wrong so much because it's feeding off information it's getting from people who are also wrong. And so when you're able to start pinpointing those things, you're like, I don't want him, like this AI, to make this decision about my health or what we should be doing for the economy or the government or whatever, right? So hopefully we still need those human thinkers.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see how that goes because, like you say, so we have public-facing AI, which I think is a lot, let's say, weaker and more generic than probably what they're doing in specialist areas. I hope anyway, because like you say,
that's a good point.
It's wrong and it's limited as well, right? It's blocked from doing certain things. And so I hope that if they, for example, train an AI doctor, at least they actually train it in the skills it needs, sort of on a hyper focus rather than, Gemini or something.
Yeah.
We'll use as the absolute worst example. So we are getting on a little bit. So I'm just going to move to the sort of last two questions before we finish. What I usually call the big questions, but as I always say also that all the questions we've talked about are big. So we've got now Elon Musk pushing his cybernetics with the idea that, at least initially, it was the idea that we'll need this technology within ourselves to challenge AI. And so, well, first of all, what are your thoughts of that? Like, is this sort of selling ourselves out because we're afraid of something else? And then does this have a purpose, for example, going to other planets, things like that? Like, is there actually a use for this? I mean, besides, we obviously have the medical uses, but
yeah, that's a good question. And I love being at the forefront of technology, but I'm also, what do I want to say, a very cautious, advanced technology enthusiast. So yeah, I'll have no problem buying a cell phone, and taking the risk that, this brand new cell phone model might be a dud and there might be a ton of issues with it. No problem. Anytime we're sticking something in our brains, though, I mean, our brain, we don't even like, the people that claim to really understand the brains, like it's still a mystery that exactly how everything works there. So the last time that I was really studying neurobiology, and I might be totally wrong. Maybe somebody really has mapped everything and knows perfectly how to replicate the human brain now. But I feel like our brains, our memories, our sense of selves are so plastic. All it takes is getting sick one time and having that brain fog to realize just how fragile that gray matter is. And so when I think of cybernetics, and I think of putting these experimental devices into the human brain, and even seeing some of kind of the side effects and some of the little failures that are happening with the cybernetics. And not to pick on Elon Musk here, but like if you look at Cybertruck and all the issues that has, and that's a truck. We know how trucks work. There's no question there, and we still mess that up. No way am I feeling comfortable putting something in my brain at this point that is permanent. I feel a little bit more comfortable with medicine and things that are impermanent. But if we're talking about those fundamental changes like that, or some device and all devices fail, and I'm supposed to trust that, I don't trust that yet. I don't feel like humanity's got that under control. We know computers and our laptops still fail. We have software that constantly runs into issues. So I'm super cautious when it comes to that. We know how easy things can be hacked. How often do we have all your personal material gets hacked? Imagine somebody being able to hack your brain. I don't like that.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna bring up. Yeah, does that increase our vulnerability in many ways?
Yeah,
especially to that kind of thing. And one of the things I wonder about is if you try to become cybernetic, especially to combat, let's say, the growing strength of AI, does that not leave you susceptible to AI to an attack by
Right.
AI, for example, right? You're feeding the
I
exact
would think
thing
so.
yeah, it's strange, yeah. But so
Yeah.
you're not in a rush to actually integrate with a kaiju or anything.
No way. Yeah, yeah.
No.
No, I'll do a one way. If there's a one way street where there's kind of those toys and things, right, that can kind of read your brain waves,
Right.
and you can control like a ball in a tube or something. If you can do that, I'm cool with that. I like the one way street approach to cybernetics, and if there's ways that we can develop that technology so it's less invasive and more one way, then I think that's cool. If you can turn it off, manually turn that off, manually flip that switch off. But if you've got something that's more integrated into your nervous system, that's a little bit more frightening. Because it's a lot easier if the AI invasion just takes us to like, oh, we just turn it off and we're good.
Yeah.
That's a lot better.
Why do you think those bans for reading your brain waves haven't taken off more? I mean, there were some. I had one for a while. I think the battery died and I wasn't able to replace it. It was more for meditation, some of them, but there was a Japanese one, I think, that was connected to like this set of ears that would move based on your mood and things like that. But do you think they were just sort of toys, or I mean, is there some reason why you don't think they took off more?
Man, this is one of those points where, with my expertise in bioengineering, I also know how much I'm not an expert in that field, and so like,
Okay.
it's like I have no idea, and I don't know the limits on. Okay, so you can read some kind of electrical activity in your brain. How accurate is it from out here? I remember seeing, man, it was a few years ago. There were some papers of being able to kind of read brain waves. And I'm sorry for a neuroscientist who I'm saying all this wrong, but they're able to use that to kind of reconstruct the image that I think it was what an animal was seeing in front of them. And so they were kind of able to piece together some images, and that was pretty impressive. So I think like that's like still on the way, but from my understanding, a lot of how the brain works and how these signals are interpreted as, like our sensory input, our thoughts and consciousness is still kind of a mystery. So I think there's enough unknown that it's hard to make it more complex.
Right.
It'd
So
be
just
like if we just had, yeah, it's like not understanding how the engine of a car works, but knowing that it goes forward if you put it into the car, but we can't really control it, right? Just what's in this black box? I don't know, but the car goes forward if we put it in.
Right. So very, very immature still, that kind of technology, you think?
I think so. That's my guess, and I'm open to being wrong, but
It would seem
that's
like
my
it,
feeling.
yeah. Because you look at I guess there's two factors in there: immature technology and lack of interest by the public, which is, I guess, the second one is what the Google glasses faced back in 2012 or whatever it is. Now those are resurrecting sort of 10 to 12 years later, aren't they?
Yeah.
So the last question I was going to ask you then is, so this deals with out there, and I was thinking. So one of the things with military sci-fi, I think it tends to be a bit more realistic than other idealistic sci-fi in the way that the human systems and structures, like political structures, tend to be formulated. So it's more like things that we can relate to. However, I said, given that relatively low bar, what do you think it would take for us to get from the point we are now in our development to a point where we might have a spacefaring civilization? Like, and I'm not going to, don't give me solve everything, just like the top one or two things that we have to either solve or fix. And at least one of them should not be technological, because that's an easy one.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because the technology stuff, we all know from sci-fi what we got to do, right? But I honestly think the easiest thing is there's two things: is either we discover how to make it commercially viable to make a ton of money by exploring space, whether that's making like, hey, the asteroid belt is actually very mineable and we need all these rare minerals, and we can make more money going out there than we can, like it's a wasted opportunity if we don't. Or the competition factor, where, hey, suddenly we have some invaders that are coming to our planet and we got to deal with that. Or it could be just like a competition between countries, or allied groups within the Earth. And obviously, I would prefer it to be the commercial aspect, because if I don't want to be at war in space. No, I don't want that to be the primary motivator, right? But I think the commercial aspect is like that discovery of making it worthwhile. Then we can justify devoting all these resources to that. Or if we have we have that excess of technology here, everybody's like happy, there's no problems on Earth, we have all this money to spend, that would be great. We have all this resources to spend if we had that utopia. But I'm with you, like I don't think the utopia is happening. So the most likely is the commercial viability.
Yeah, and I have a feeling if the utopia did happen, people wouldn't actually want to leave it,
Right.
which might be a problem as well. But
I wonder.
So go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say I wonder that, and then I think there's still. I feel like there's like, let's go back to Disney's Moana, and it's like, oh, we have this perfect little life on this island. There's always somebody that's like, hey, let's just go explore what's on the other side just for fun. Or like you're on a hike with somebody. How many times you go on a hike with somebody? We reach the summit. Somebody points over there. Well, that would look cool to explore. I'm going to go this way. And I think there's always somebody crazy or brave enough to push you, even in a utopia, because that's what humans do, I guess. That's my thought. Is maybe there's somebody still that would push it just to do it.
Yeah, I think I could see two things there. One, I think in Moana there was also the rot on the island, wasn't there? So
that's true. That's true. A pretty good motivator.
Yeah, but the other thing is, so I agree with that. But when I think of back to my life, I got a couple examples of stuff like that. But it's usually when you're young, right? Youngish, like let's say pre-30, for example.
Yeah.
And it almost feels like we're losing that interest in that generation, with I can become rich as a YouTuber or TikToker rather than doing something challenging and difficult, like, going into space or something. So the number of people, I mean, there are still some. We do know my daughter has one in her class, a girl who's interested in being an astronaut, but it seems to be increasingly rare, which worries me. And I hope we could instill that enthusiasm, interest, and excitement and exploration in the younger generation again.
Yeah, totally agree. I think I get a little bit of faith back when I was working in the labs, and I'd have these students that were in high school and stuff come, and for no better reason than to come to these. We'd have these 3D printing camps, and you see there's the people that are there to put it on their resume, and then there's the people that are there, these teenagers that are just so into it, they blow you away, and you're like, why are you putting all this extra work into creating this 3D printed model? But they're just, it's like those people exist, and I want those people to be famous on TikTok and Instagram, right? Like I want us to, like you said, like I want us to revere like these explorers and these people willing to take that risk, and I'd love to see more of that, fostering that, on an individual level, but then on a wider level. And I think we need that romanticizing of that kind of exploration and braveness, whether it's in the lab or it's going somewhere that, searching somewhere that hasn't been discovered on Earth, which there's still some places that, are still out there.
Especially under the water. I mean, that's actually under the water, given sort of the ice age situation, right? The fact that any civilizations that might have existed during the last ice age are all buried now under the water, all the coastal stuff. I mean, that's just ripe for exploration, basically.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And if let's say there's already a galactic civilization, very final question for sure. What form do you think it might take? Because quite often, as in military sci-fi, it's always combative, right?
Yeah.
So what do you hope, and what do you think it was reality?
I think I like to believe that there's got to be some other life. It would be crazy to me to think, as big as the universe is, that the only life is on Earth. I bet there's something else going on there, but we wouldn't recognize it. And so I think my personal belief, totally unscientific, would be that if there's some other galactic civilization, it would just be something we couldn't even imagine, beings that we couldn't imagine. And most of what we do in sci-fi is, even if we try to relate it, it's still like we can still interact on these same planes of reality and somehow communicate. And they're beings that are organic or an organic analog that we can communicate with. But I can only just imagine there being some civilization that we would not be able to at all imagine. I think that's the most likely case, or that it's so advanced that they look like some kind of magic gods to us or something, if we ever interact with anything like that. And I would hope that it would be a more scientifically minded let's say, preservation focused civilization, because I can only imagine if somebody discovers us first, we're going to look like Charles Darwin going to the Galapagos Islands, where there's just a bunch of animals that don't have any clue that they have predators, or don't have any clue that humans are bad or anything like that. And I don't want like these aliens to come down and wipe us all out. I'd rather them be like, oh, these are cute little humans. Like, let's let them do their own thing. Or, hey, let's give them a few technology toys to play with to better them, rather than just squash us because, they want to.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to think of truly, because like you say, most in science fiction, when we're writing, most of what we imagine or what we portray has links to human society in some way. That's understandable, because otherwise, readers won't, and ourselves likely won't be able to actually understand what's going on. So even if it is in some ways it's frustrating, because even if you're able to imagine a truly foreign alien species, you can't really convey it properly on the page, because no one would understand what you're talking about, basically, right?
Right. I like how the three body problem, they kind of like dealt with that in a good way, both the TV show and the books. And it was still like you're trying to grasp that, even though the aliens are so different, but you're still trying to grasp what that means and how to communicate with them. I got to think that if there's aliens, it'd be so much harder than even that portrays it to be.
Yeah, I guess. Well, hopefully we'll find out in the positive way at some point, not the negative way.
For sure.
So I think we have gone fairly long today, so we're about out of time. But it's been great chatting with you. Before you go, perhaps you could remind us of sort of your next books. I mean, there's probably going to be a number of them at the pace that you write, and then where to find you online, and if you'll be at any upcoming events.
Yeah. So the first question is pretty easy. I don't have any events or anything that I'm really going to, but I'm always happy to reach out and talk to people through my Facebook groups or emails. My website's anthonyjmelchiorri.com. Facebook, same thing, Anthony J. Melchiorri. Unfortunately, there's another famous Anthony Melchiorri. And when I say famous, I'm not famous. He's famous. He hosted the Hotel Impossible show. So if you look up Anthony Melchiorri, it's always better to look up Anthony Melchiorri books on Google or whatever. My latest series, easiest way to find me, is Sunken Spaceship. And that's just a kind of a fun galactic romp of somebody getting, like a marine biologist, like my science characters, who incidentally, while studying an octopus, finds himself taken away to galactic civilization after unwittingly breaking some intergalactic laws. So it's a fun, lighthearted sci-fi romp that it weaves in some of the stuff we talked about today. But that's my latest series that I'm working on. And book 5 is coming out. Book 4 just came out. Book 5 is coming out December. Book 6 will be out early 2025.
Well, that's excellent. Thank you, Anthony Melchiorri. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was fun to talk about everything, and I hope we solved a lot of the world's problems in one podcast.
And thank you for listening. Information and links related to this and all episodes are available at alternatefutures.co.uk. I'm also over at Substack under Alternate Futures, where I post articles on science fiction, socio-technological issues, and futurism. You can subscribe for free or sign up for a paid account if you'd like to support the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, why not share it with friends, writers, and other sci-fi fans you know? And if there are any indie sci-fi creators you'd like to see featured, send me a message at podcast@alternatefutures.co.uk. Once again, I'd like to thank you for listening, and I hope you'll join me on the next episode.
This is the future. Human error. Evolution. This is the future.